Chronicles of Narnia, The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis. Chapter 5, Puddlegum. Jill was asleep. Ever since the Owls' Parliament began, she had been yawning terribly, and now she had dropped off. She was not at all pleased at being waked again, and finding herself lying on bare boards in a dusty belfry sort of place, completely dark and almost completely full of owls. She was even less pleased when she heard that they had to set off for somewhere else, and not, apparently, for bed, on the owl's back. "Oh, come on, Paul," said Scrub's voice. "After all, it is an adventure." "I'm sick of adventures," said Jill crossly. She did, however, consent to climb onto Gilmfeather's back, and was thoroughly waked up for a while by the unexpected coldness of the air when he flew out with her into the night. The moon had disappeared and there were no stars. Far behind her she could see a single lighted window well above the ground, doubtless one of the towers of Chair Paravel. It made her long to be back in that delightful bedroom, snug in bed, watching the firelight on the walls. She put her hands under her cloak and wrapped it tightly around her. It was uncanny to hear two voices in the dark here a little distance away. Scrub and his owl were talking to one another. "He doesn't sound tired," thought Jill. She did not realize that he had been on great adventures in that world before, and that the Narnian air was bringing back to him strength he had won when he sailed the Eastern Sea with King Caspian. Jill had to pinch herself to keep her awake, for she knew that if she dozed on Gilmfeather's back she would probably fall off. When at last the two owls ended their flight, she climbed stiffly off Gilmfeather and found herself on the flat ground. A chilly wind was blowing, and they appeared to be in a place without trees. "Toot-toot, toot-toot," Gilmfeather was calling. "Wake up, Puddlegum! Wake up! It's on the lion's business." For a long time there was no reply. Then, a long way off, a dim light appeared and began to come nearer. With it came a voice. "Elves, ahoy!" it said. "What is it? Is the king dead? Has an enemy landed in Narnia? Is it a flood? Or dragons?" When the light reached them, it turned to be that of a large lantern. She could see very little of the person who held it. He seemed to be all legs and arms. The owls were talking to him, explaining everything, but she was too tired to listen. She tried to wake herself up a bit when she realized that they were saying goodbye to her. But she could never afterwards remember much except that, sooner or later, she and Scrub were stooping to enter a low doorway. And then, oh thank heavens, were lying down on something soft and warm, and a voice was saying, "There you are, best we can do. You're like cold and hard. Damp too, shan't wonder. Won't sleep a wink, most likely, even if there's a thunderstorm or flood, or the wingworm doesn't fall down top of all, as I've known them do. Must make the best of it." But she was fast asleep before the voice had ended. Then the children woke late the next morning, and they found that they were lying, very dry and warm, on beds of straw in a dark place. A triangular opening let in the daylight. "Where on earth are we?" asked Jill. "In the warm wigwam of a marsh-wiggle," said Eustace. "A what?" "A marsh-wiggle. Don't ask me what it is. I couldn't see it last night. I'm getting up. Let's go and look for it." "How beastly one feels after sleeping in one's clothes," said Jill, sitting up. "I was just thinking about how nice it would be not to have a dress," said Eustace. "Or wash either, I suppose," said Jill scornfully. But Scrub had already got up, yawned, shaken himself, and crawled out of the wigwam. Jill did the same. What they found outside was quite unlike the bit of Narnia they had seen the day before. They were on a great flat plain which was cut into countless little islands by countless channels of water. The islands were covered with coarse grass and bordered with reeds and rushes. Sometimes there were beds of bushes, but an acre in extent. Clouds of birds were constantly alighting in them and rising from them. Duck, snipe, bitterns, herons. Many wigwams like that in which they had passed the night could be seen dotted about, but all at a good distance from one another, for marsh-wiggles are people who love privacy. Except for the fringe of the forest several miles to the south and west of them, there was not a tree in sight. Eastward of the flat marsh stretched to a low sand hill on the horizon, and you could tell by the salt tang in the wind which blew from that direction that the sea lay over there. To the north there were low pale-coloured hills, in places bastoned with rock. The rest was all flat marsh. It would have been a depressing place on that wet evening. Seen under a morning sun, with a fresh wind blowing, and the air filled with the crying of birds, there was something fine and fresh and clean about its loneliness. The children felt their spirits rise. "Where's the got two, I wonder, said Jill. The marsh wiggle, said Scrub, as if he were rather proud of knowing the word. I expect, hullo, that must be him. And then they both saw, sitting with his back to them, fishing about 50 yards away. He had been hard to see at first because he was nearly the same colour as the marsh, and because he sat so still. I suppose we'd better go and speak to him, said Joel. Scrub nodded. They both felt a little nervous. As they drew near, the figure turned its head and showed them a long, thin face with rather sunken cheeks, a tightly shut mouth, a sharp nose, and no beard. He was wearing a high pointed hat like a steeple with an enormously wide flat brim. Her hair, if it could be called hair, which hung over his large ears was greeny-grey, and each lock was flat rather than round, so that they were like tiny reeds. His expression was solemn, his complexion muddy, and you could see that he took a serious view of life. "Good morning, guests," he said. "Though when I say good, I don't mean probably to turn or rain. It might be snow or fog or thunder. You didn't get any sleep, I dare say." "Yes, we did," said Joel. "We had a lovely night." "Ah," said the marsh wiggle, shaking his head. "I see you're making the best of a bad job. That's right. You've been well brought up, you have. You've learned to put a good face on things." "Please, we don't know your name," said Scrub. "Puddlegum's my name, but it doesn't matter if you can get it. I can always tell you again." The children sat down on each side of him. They now saw that he had very long legs and arms, so that although his body was not much bigger than a dwarf's, he would be taller than most men when he stood up. His fingers of his hands were webbed like a frog's, and so were his bare feet, which dangled in the muddy water. He was dressed in earthly-coloured clothes that hung loose around him. "I'm trying to catch a few eels to make an eel stew for our dinner," said Puddlegum. "Though I shouldn't wonder if I didn't get any, and you wouldn't like them much if I do." "Why not?" said Scrub. "Why, it's not in reason that you should like sort of victuals, though I've no doubt you could put a bold face on it. All the same, while I'm catching 'em, if you could try to light a fire, no harm trying. The wood's behind the wigwam. It may be wet, but you could light it inside of the wigwam, and then we could get all the smoke in our eyes. If you could light it outside, then the rain would come and put it out. Here's my tinder box. You won't know how to use it, I expect." But Scrub had learned that sort of thing on his last adventure. The children ran back together to the wigwam, found the wood, which was perfectly dry, and succeeded in lighting a fire with rather less than the usual difficulty. Then Scrub sat and took care of it while Jill went and took some sort of wash, not a very nice one, in the nearest channel. After that she saw to the fire, and he had a wash. Both felt a very good deal fresher, but very hungry. Presently the marsh wiggle joined them. In spite of his expectation of catching no eels, he had a dozen or so, which he had already skinned and cleaned. He put a big pot on, mended the fire, and lit his pipe. Marsh wiggles smoke a very strange, heavy sort of tobacco. Some people say they mix it with mud, and the children noticed the smoke from the Puddlegum's pipe hardly rose in the air at all. It trickled out of the bowl and downwards and drifted along the ground like a mist. It was very black, and said Scrub, coughing. "Now," said Puddlegum, "those eels would take a more or long time to cook, and neither of you might faint with hunger before they're done. I knew a little girl, but I better not tell you that story. It might lower your spirits, and that's a thing I never do. So keep your minds off your hunger. We might as well talk about your plans." Let's," said Joel.